everyone, welcome back to Hats Off. I'm here with Dr. Melinda Hall from the Philosophy Department, and we're going to be talking about everything philosophy. We have a special guest, Frankie, today, if you hear him on camera, and I'm super excited for you to watch this episode. Just for introductions, I'm Ali. I'm the future editor-in-chief of Hatter Network. May you introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Melinda Hall. I teach here at Stetson University. I've been here since 2013 and have taken on different types of leadership roles, but my favorite thing is teaching philosophy.
Super fun. You're my favorite professor, not only in the philosophy department, but just in general.
Aww, that makes me so happy.
Your classes, I finished out my philosophy minor, and that's what made me add on the philosophy major. I was really excited to tell you that when I took bioethics with you. What do you love about teaching? Do you have courses that you really enjoy, or just the general essence of being in the classroom?
I absolutely love watching students have a realization. So I love reading things together and puzzling them out. And then when a student sort of offers something up that I didn't see before, or when a student says something that matches an experience that I had in reading the text, that makes me so happy. And sometimes I like to catch somebody's eye and kind of say did you notice this? And when they do, that makes me so happy. So yeah, I think reading text with a group, and I love doing that anyway. I love doing that, when I was in graduate school, that drove me forward to read a really interesting or unique text, something that makes you laugh or makes you interested, and doing that with friends definitely pulled me forward through grad school. So really early on, we read Plato's Timaeus, and it's a hilarious cosmology of how Plato wanted to say that the world came to be. And he had Timaeus do the dialogue, and we read that in my first year with my cohort, and we were just in hysterics over it. It was talking just about what makes something hot and what makes something cold, and whether or not there were rocks at the beginning of the universe and what happened next. And I just thought it was hilarious. So yeah, that's what I love about teaching.
Tell me more about your education. What really drove you to philosophy? Was that what you thought you were going to end up doing?
So no, not at all. So I was always really, really interested in reading and literature. So that was always something that I took for granted. I didn't think about it in terms of pursuing something in particular. I just thought reading books and writing were a part of my life. But I thought about career a little bit differently. I wanted to run for public office. I wanted to be a senator. I wanted to change school districts, change the way that schools were funded, and a lot of ideas about politics. So when I went to undergrad, I decided to go to American University because it was in D.C. I had applied to Georgetown and didn't get in.
Yeah.
So I went to American. I had, a full ride, and so I was like, okay, this is good. I'm sad about Georgetown, but this is going to be great. So I started out as a political science major and thought that I would run for office. But everything I loved about political science was actually philosophy. And it took me maybe a year to realize that. It was a delayed realization. So I added philosophy in, and then there were a lot of basic things that drove me forward, needing to have income, needing to put myself through school, and so that meant that I was working. And I worked at the Environmental Protection Agency for 3 years, started out as an unpaid internship, and then I became a staff member. And I realized through that I did not want to be in politics, that I didn't want to run for office, that I also didn't want to be a career bureaucrat, that I didn't really like the scene. And so when I finished up my philosophy degree, I applied for graduate school and law school at the same time, and thought about either one. And then when I got into Vanderbilt, I was shocked. It was the happiest I've ever been, couldn't believe it, and went to do my PhD in philosophy. And for me, a lot of that was about achievement, learning, excitement, not necessarily about teaching, but just what felt good and wonderful to me at the time. And then I learned how to teach at Vanderbilt. So I did a sex and gender certificate, teaching feminist theory, essentially. And I learned how to teach through trial by fire. in really awkward situations where I was 22 years old and my students were 18.
Yeah.
So that was great.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, very fun.
How has teaching been here at Stetson? Are there courses that you prefer over others? Are there disciplines that you really want to focus on teaching further?
Yeah, I think that I would love to continue to be able to work with the public health and the environmental science students and pre-med students on ethics issues. I really like teaching bioethics. I really like teaching environmental ethics. But the reality, the actual truth of the matter, is that my favorite thing to teach is logic. Because as we're talking, I'm realizing that this is true about me. I definitely do like being a little bit silly, even though I teach about like tough topics. And logic lets me do that. It lets me make up silly arguments, rhymes, make a joke, like engage students in a different way, and work with them in a different way. So logic is my favorite thing to teach. I always want to teach logic. I rarely have enough time.
Yes.
And when it gets much closer to my heart, when I am working on reproductive justice, when I'm working on disability theory, sometimes that's really hard to teach because I have to open myself up to the curiosity of my students, which doesn't always come out in kind ways, which everybody's growing and learning. Everybody is thinking these things through. They're tough topics. But when you're very invested, teaching is both beautiful and terrifying. So logic is the most fun. Bioethics is the most meaningful. Yeah.
For logic, you can find out more on the Stetson Philosophy Instagram. We will be teaching this in fall. Dr. Hall will be teaching logic again this fall. Super fun, super interesting, and definitely probably one of the most helpful classes that I've taken at Stetson. I took logic, I believe my freshman year, with David DeQuattro. And that class was challenging, but I still to this day see problems differently. Yeah. Even just the way that I word things, I see it differently, and I didn't know that it would just weasel and brainworm into my mind.
Yes.
Like that. And I think that is what attracts people to philosophy in a way. It makes you think and really makes you subconsciously think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think learning and teaching logic, it reminds me a little bit of doing something like grammar with respect to literature. You know that philosophy is powerful, but you're not always paying attention to why. And when you focus on logic, when you think about the puzzle of the argument, things pop out or become clear, and then you can't really forget them. So similarly, when you learn the rules of grammar and you notice how meaning works, it changes your approach to rhetoric. And you think like, oh, I love this book, but goodness gracious, or I love this book and now I can see why because it's so beautifully constructed. I think logic has that sort of similar or analogous relationship to works of philosophy. But logic helps any student. Yeah. Oh my goodness, it makes writing papers a breeze. It makes thinking through, your evidence a breeze and looking for problems. So, yeah.
I definitely recommend it. Any major out there, take it. It'll be a lot more interesting and easier than you think it is. That Q course requirement as a quantitative reasoning, it's really not that daunting when you think about it. And you come out the other side feeling a lot better about yourself. You walk in afraid. Yes. When I got my workbook, I don't believe they still use the workbooks now. But when I got my workbook, reading through that before we got onto those sections, I was very, very frightened. But it's not. Yeah. It's not that scary. Outside of the logic, analytical, bioethics, all of these interdisciplinary fields that you do. Yeah. What do you like to do outside of philosophy?
Yeah. I love reading horror and sci-fi. I love what used to be referred to as like hard sci-fi, when it's like fact, innovation, and like really serious scientific type stuff, like Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy and things like that. And now with like a lot of emerging thinkers. I really like Afrofuturism, which is often a kind of hard sci-fi, but with some really cool fantasy elements. I think it's like kind of the new magical realism. So I love to read, and I used to sort of save reading novels for summer, and then I was so much happier in the summer that I finally realized that it didn't matter if I was behind on grading. I needed to read every day, every week. So I usually read about a book a week, and those things sort of just feed me in a little bit of a different way. But I also really like to be outdoors and be sort of in the sun and walk, and nothing like super rigorous. I'm not like a really big athlete or anything like that. But I like to move my body, and I like to be outdoors and take advantage of the beautiful sort of environs of Florida and get bitten, and thankfully not by alligators, but by bugs. But yeah, I like those things.
What are you currently reading?
Right now, let me think, what am I reading? I just finished Babel by R.F. Kuang. She's also the author of the Poppy Wars trilogy, and Babel wasn't exactly what I expected. She's very young. She's at, I think, Yale right now, working on her PhD in Asian languages, and she published her first text her first novels when she was like 18, 19 years old. I love Poppy War. I think Babel wasn't really my thing, but it was just a little bit too soft, but it was all about the rebellion of young students who were brought to Oxford to work as translators in a retold history of British colonization. And I don't know, I like Poppy Wars better. And then what do I have open right now? I can't even think of it. Winter People by Jennifer McMahon, I think her name is. Winter People. It's okay. It's good. It's like kind of a horror book. Not my favorite either, but I'm reading it. What are you reading right now, Ali?
Oh my God. What am I reading right now? Well, I'm doing my senior research right now, so I'm reading a lot of disability theory.
Yes. And this is what I love to talk about with you.
Yes. I've gone through most things on your blog.
Dialogues on disability, interviews, the biopolitical philosophy blog more generally.
Yes.
That makes me happy.
That's been a lot of where I've been getting short form, more argumentative content.
Yes.
And then I'm reading a lot of poetic literature and theory just to get my other basis.
Yeah.
So I've been reading so much. I've loved reading Amelia Nielsen and her work on disability poetics.
Oh,
of course,
yes.
I love your collaborator, Shelley Tremaine.
Yes.
Reading a lot of her work on the blog has been really helpful, especially because she has a lot of her presentations that she does automatically transcribed out on the blog. Seeing things like that and the way that she presents it as well, I can almost hear a visual presenter saying it.
She's so great about that. She's so incredible about making sure that her work is available multimodally, thinking about screen readers, interacting with our blog, thinking about people who maybe even attended the conference but want to reread her presentation. And I think that's so nice. So Ali is talking about my dear friend Shelley Tremaine and long-term collaborator. She's an independent scholar and philosopher in Canada, and she and I work together on trying to treat disability in a political way. In other words, to read disability politically from beginning to end. And it's a tough area to work in if you're a philosopher. There are a lot of reasons why there's stigma. And Shelley and I have tried to stick together and build a community with other disabled philosophers and think about the way that we can build a world of philosophy a little bit differently. She's much more active on the blog than I am, but I have a full-time role at Stetson, and Shelley's full-time role is her scholarship. So she gets to engage there a little bit more than me. But we love our blog, biopoliticalphilosophy.com. check it out. We have other folks who write for it, like Mitch Trua, and they are a really cool sort of anti-capitalist disability theorist. And Axel Barcelo, I can't remember his name right now, cut that part out, who writes also in Spanish for the blog. It was awesome. Yeah.
Finding a lot of work through your work and finding places and resources through you has been something that is incredibly helpful. Not only through my experience, but I think being active in a classroom with you as a TA and getting to almost have like a fly on the wall perspective, because I got this information and it helped me so much a whole year prior, getting to see them do it. I have senior research with a couple people who were in bioethics, and I can see the way that it affected their thinking and their argument style, and just noticing these little like ramifications that are so positive in the way that you teach, just super helpful. I wouldn't know about a lot of the things that I find so interesting and that I'm working on arguing right now. Had I not gotten into your class, I took Intro to Philosophy with Dr. Ron Hall before he retired, and that was interesting to me. Identifying as a materialist, that class was very, very interesting, as he is also a materialist.
Yes.
And it just made me want more, and I'm so grateful that I immediately hopped into your class. Not even for my philosophy minor, it was an extra credit for me, just a gen ed before I became a double major. Now I don't have to do those, which is nice. But classes like you teach really provide such a different perspective in the way that you hold yourself and the way that you dive into information, because it is difficult. A lot of the disciplines that you do are chewy for people who aren't in it for the reasons that they're in it. Maybe they're there for the credit, maybe they're there because it's a good philosophy elective, etc., it fulfills something. But I do find a lot of people leaving the classroom with something that they didn't think that they were going to get when they might have signed up for credit. It was really sweet getting to see that at the end of bioethics when we had donuts and like just a fun collaboration day at the end where we all talked about all the fun things that we had learned in the last 3 months. And whether they were difficult or just interesting, everyone left with something that changed their perspective, not even just philosophically, but just in general.
That's so good to hear. And I want to say, too, that you're a wonderful TA. You
Thank
provided
you.
so much leadership. And I really appreciated the way that you also provided like mentorship and leadership on like the work of being a student and the ways that that takes shape and some of the challenges and difficulties that students might encounter along the way. You always made sure to articulate that. And I think that's so good for the students to hear from a peer and somebody who just went through some of the same challenges that they went through. You always slowed down to lift out like from beneath my my merge. I think that's part of like teaching something that's too close to your heart sometimes. It's hard to come up for air. And you would put things on the board or lift out elements that I wasn't making explicit for the students, and that was just incredibly helpful. I thought we made a great team.
Yeah.
So fun to have you do that. But yeah, I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit more was what you mentioned about like theory being chewy. I think it's hard as a professor to motivate theory for folks, and I always try to focus on the idea of storytelling, and maybe this is all about my fiction obsession, but argumentation is one philosophical tool. Illuminating some new part of the world through theory is another, and theory is argumentative, that's for sure, but a good theory will help you sort what you're experiencing, hopefully in like a new way. And I always hope that students notice that about the things that we're reading. There may be many things that you think, well, I actually don't need to wrestle with that part. I can see what that person is doing. They're wrestling with this language, or they're wrestling with this problem in and through their theory. And maybe you don't follow that part, and maybe you might in a few years think of it. But there may be some other portion of the reading where you think, wow, like, that illuminates something I'd noticed before. I never had a word for it. And then sometimes, and this happens to me too, you read something and you're like, that does the opposite of illuminate. That covers over more about the world that I wanted to notice. That's not a good contribution to the conversation. And that's a completely wonderful philosophical experience too. So I think theory can like illuminate things. I think unfortunately when theory fails, it can feel like clumsy and that it covers over. And that's when you know like, oh, what I want to do is I want to understand the world. And philosophy can help me do that. That framing for theory really helps. But a lot of people see it as the opposite of practical. I know that's not right. But getting students to buy in to the fact that it's going to help them or provide a new frame for them to engage their life, that's a lot of work. So I think that's really, really hard. And you're good at that. And I think that a lot of our philosophy majors are able to notice things about texts that they can share in an interdisciplinary group. But some students, unfortunately, just shut down. And I get it because it's a different demand that the reading is making. It's a totally different task that the reading is undertaking. It's not presenting you with, facts. So I'll just add maybe one more thing, which is that I'm having a really interesting experience co-teaching with Dr. Mike Eskenazi in the psychology department. We're teaching a Madness in Venice course. It's basically looking at different mental health movements over time and anti-psychiatry in Italy, led by Franklin Delano in the 60s to close asylums. And he said something funny the other day, and I'm still trying to work this out. And it's such a funny thing. I taught something that he thought had logical incoherence. And he was like, I don't understand, you're not logically incoherent. Why don't you teach your own stuff? Why are you teaching this? Because it's not good. And I said to him, oh, so you only ever teach things that are true? Facts? True things? That's interesting. I don't do that. I don't teach things. I don't present students with a long list of only facts that we can be sure of. I could do that for bioethics. I could say things like, well, it wouldn't really be philosophy in my opinion, but I could do things like say, here's the history of reproductive justice, here's names, dates, and of course I do talk about these things along the way. I could say things like, Florida just had a really weird moment. Not only did they uphold the 6-week abortion ban, but they also are going to allow us to vote on the potential to insert reproductive rights into our state constitution. I could do it like that, but I don't. Instead, I do things like read somebody that has some really interesting things to say about reproductive justice and see what it illuminates. And then when they toss out things that I disagree with, I just say, okay, I don't like that part. What did you all think? But I just simply don't try to make sure that I find people who only have things to say that I can affirm. I just don't. And that's not what I think philosophy is all about. But that's so different from other fields. And I think students, when they take a class, they're like, wait a second, but you assigned me something and somebody said this thing that is definitely wrong. And that's the first step of philosophy. That's not a bad thing, right? But anyway, it's just a weird, interesting experience to talk about with Dr. Eskenazi. And I think he does. In psychology, he tries to teach only things that he can affirm. It's not what I'm up to.
You mentioned a little bit of teaching your own work and how that's not always a desire for you in the classroom. I mean, working on your own work, it might get a little bit overwhelming to be doing it all of the time and then reteaching it to people. What are you currently working on?
So I'm working on a book on risk, and I have been for about 6 years. It's taken me quite a while. I've grown and birthed an entire human in the time that I've been working on this book, who's now 5 years old. We've also had a global pandemic, which, by the way, I was working on risk before that. And I know I've told you this story, Ali, before, and many others, but I remember working on Ebola and Zika in early work on on my text on risk and thinking like, oh, I wonder what the next big virus is going to be. And then, of course, we found out. So that slowed me down as well, because the kind of philosophical work that I do, I try to look at discourse in institutions like Michel Foucault, who's my primary influence, did. So I have to find out how risk is being treated during the pandemic and post, if we're post pandemic. I can't assume it. So I slowed way down again. But essentially my book on risk is to say that risk is political. Yeah. That there's risk is always attached to a project. It's always attached to value. There's no objective evaluation of risk. So you can say that there are probabilities. Probabilities can be calculated in particular ways. But what you can't say is that something counts as a risk without there being a value or a project. So risk is super important for understanding disability. That's why I got into it. Because if you can understand what things we take to be risk, that can help you understand the social construction of disability and why disability is political. And I think most people think that risk is just plain, objective stuff about the universe, and I think that it's an expression of our political contingent circumstances, and that it changes over time. Because like you, I'm a materialist and a historical one, so yeah, so I've been working on that book for a while. Most recently, it looks like I'm going to publish that with Roman and Littlefield. They are saying that they can issue me a contract, but I gotta write the thing before that part. So yes, I'm working on that primarily. I'm also updating my entry for the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on critical disability theory. When you write for the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, you have to commit to updating your entry every 5 years. And mine was first published in 2019, so my update is due this year. And that involves like finding new stuff that's been published in the area and making sure that everything is up to date, and cleaning up the edges of the entry. So they're knocking on my door about that, and I'm ignoring their emails while I work on it. Yes, that's what I'm working on. And you're working on your senior project.
Yes.
I'm so happy for you. I'm so excited to see where it goes. I'm so excited to see the things you say about disability. I love talking to you about disability and horror movies.
Yes, we're peas of the same pod, I think.
Yes.
A lot of our interests tend to co-align, which has been so comforting finding a professor like you at Stetson. I came to Stetson not thinking that I was incredibly smart. I mean, I knew that I was intelligent, but I didn't think that I really had much to add to conversations because I felt like it had all been done before. And now I'm seeing things in critical theory that aren't being done.
Yes.
And that I have things that I want to say about them. And having guidance like yours, I mean, next semester when we're doing senior projects together.
It's going to be amazing.
It's going to be so fun and interesting. And I think something that you also opened my eyes up to with medical health and humanities, developing and hopeful upcoming minor, getting to meet all of these professors in disciplines that I didn't ever touch. Poli-sci and philosophy, while philosophy credit-wise isn't extremely overbearing, poli-sci is a little bit. And so my freshman and sophomore year, I was just knocking out credit requirements. And now I'm finally getting to do things that are fun and interesting and relative to the things that I like to do. And it has just worked so well in the time that you are all working on this developing minor, getting to meet so many professors and work on Snap Talks with you guys. And trivia nights have been really eye-opening. Professors like Mike Eskenazi. Recently we had Sam Houston, Paul Croce, Hannah Markley, of course. I work with Hannah Markley very closely, and I never would have been able to do that had I not taken courses like yours and had reminders that disciplines like these are important and so interdisciplinary to so many different departments that I genuinely wouldn't have gotten into contact with.
Yeah, it's so true. And even the ones you're mentioning, English, history, religious studies, psychology. Yes, like these disciplines also involve quantitative and qualitative research at times. But the thing that they have in common, at least in part, is the focus on the human. And so that means in the English department, of course, less so in psychology, but in the English, religious studies, and history departments, this idea of the humanities as an approach to the world, it's so important to me. And my collaborator, Dr. Markley, who you mentioned, we think that understanding medicine in all of its guises as like institutions, discourses, ways of talking, ways of engaging each other, we think that understanding that is going to require like a ton of different types of tools. You're going to have to be able to read, you're going to have to be able to engage, you're going to have to think about things in different ways and in and through art and in and through personal narrative. And it just, in order to really sort of live a full life as a scholar who's interested in medicine, we think that it sort of like takes an interdisciplinary touch. So we're super primed about medical and health humanities. We went back and forth a bunch about different names, but we do like that the MHH is in there because Hannah Markley and Melinda Hall, and we kept trying to recombine until we found something. It didn't completely work, but we're really pumped about it. It's gotten slowed down just slightly, but only because of the intricacies of our curricular development at Stetson. We take a huge amount of pride, and I think I can say this non-ironically. We do take a huge amount of pride in our coursework, and we're really careful about opening new programs because they require resources. So I actually helped write a new policy. A new policy about how you have to get the provost to sign off when you open up a new program. And I helped write the policy, and then a year later I forgot all about it, and I didn't ask the provost to sign off. So I was pretty ridiculous and forgot about the new rule. So anyway, we're opening up next year, though, I believe, and I think it'll be a really, really good minor, and I think it'll open up pre-med students to a totally different way of approaching the world and their lives and their professions. And by the way, it makes you a lot more attractive to those med schools.
Yes.
So
it looks good for public health students, pre-med students, etc. And it also, I think, for all of those other interdisciplinary fields, I mean, people who are in psych often feel the need to go clinical. People who are in philosophy, political science, history often feel the need to go to law school. And that removal of pressure and finding something that you... No hate to law school. I mean, it's fantastic for everyone who wants to pursue that type of route. But,
and if you can afford it.
Oh, of course, yeah. A lot of us, I mean, I know me specifically, I did pre-law in high school. I knew that I also wanted to be a senator.
Did you? And oh my God, we're the same person.
I came to Stetson with a poli-sci degree. I wanted to go into the Senate, probably in obviously a more liberal state. But that was like an end goal for me, and I realized that it wasn't making me feel passionate. It was kind of like something that I was just pushing towards, my Sisyphus rock, in a sense. And then opening my eyes to philosophy and realizing that doesn't have to look like law school. To some it does, which it is incredibly helpful. That's how we pitch it at Hatter Saturday.
Philosophy majors get into law school in droves. I mean, that's part of what logic is for.
Definitely.
All that reading comprehension. Those are the exact skills that we work on. Analytical reasoning, that's what's up, you know, in the philosophy degree. But the question is, what do you want to do with it? And loads of folks are realizing that there's just incredible demand for thoughtful ethicists, for thoughtful HR reps. Goodness gracious. We have people go into human resources. We have people go into nonprofit work. And there's just all kinds of things to do in medicine as well, going back to the original point that we were discussing. Just in the same way that someone might realize that med school isn't the only path. You're going to see all these different opportunities. Medicine is really complex, and we have NGOs, we have social work, we have art therapists, we have all kinds of folks. My current TA in the Madness in Venice course, Laura Cheshire, put together a major that combines psychology and philosophy courses and some other things for art therapy. And CREA courses, of course, so in creative arts. And that's incredible. That's medicine. That's a part of the world that, you know, she's going to interact with people who have complex medical needs. And she's going to do that through an incredible lens that's going to fill her world, her cup, her heart, I don't know. And I think that's so good because she wouldn't have liked med school.
I like that you brought up art therapy. It reminds me of an opportunity that you made me aware of in bioethics. Grace Marketplace.
Yes, talk about that. So you started, right?
Yes, I have been volunteering at Grace Marketplace since last winter. And Grace Marketplace, for those who don't know, you can look them up on the internet, just Grace Marketplace. They're located in Gainesville. They have 150 beds for unhoused populations in Gainesville. The east side of Gainesville is a food desert. There's rampant in poverty there, and seeing Grace be so helpful and welcoming to people. They have the meal program where anyone who walks through the doors can get 3 meals a day. We have the garden. You can work at the garden on Saturdays. It's super nice. A bunch of the guests there, and on the topic of guests, something that Grace does is that they see everyone as people and not unhoused statistics. And in my experience, growing up in South Florida, which also has a unfortunate rampant unhoused population, it's often regarded with those people are just panhandling. They're often seen as lesser than or high risk populations. Or lying, wanting to feed off of things. And the people that I have met at Grace, the guests, are so driven and kind, and no one would look at them with kindness if they were still out on the street and having a place where they can go and get meals a day. Work in the garden. They can all have their own little plots. Right now, what are we growing? I think we're growing some etc. types of beans because it's the feeding season into spring. I also work at the boutique where on Wednesdays and Saturdays, guests can come in and get 1 or 2 of each item. That's shorts, skirts, underwear, socks, bras, long sleeve shirts, undershirts. You can get so much, and a lot of the donations that we get help them prepare for job interviews, and we have a lot of professional clothing as well. I wouldn't have known of anything like this, and working at Grace, getting to get to know Lee Scott, who runs the volunteer program. He's so kind. He knows everyone's name. He knows everything about them, what they're up to, the programs that they institute there, getting people rehoused, getting people into rehabilitation centers, keeping people safe. And Grace is one of the few, unfortunately, centers in Florida that accepts people who are
not
sober, with a drug reliance, out of prison, etc. We also at Grace accept people who have dogs. We have a pet shelter because unfortunately in Florida, a lot of shelters will not accept people who are not sober, who have drug reliance, who have pets. And that pet is your family. I know that if I were in a situation, which a lot of us are living paycheck to paycheck now. I mean, I am.
Most people are.
Most people
in the
are.
United States.
Yeah. My partner and I, the way that we budget, if a disaster were to happen, who knows? And losing our dog would be heartbreaking. And so getting to see everyone come into the boutique where I mainly work with their dogs, and we let them take shirts for their dogs. A lot of them wear fun little shirts outside. I know all of them. They're all super, super sweet. They are sometimes naughty and like to chew on hangers, but that's okay.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, part of the process for them. Getting to work there has been really eye-opening. I wish that I had seen more things like this when I was little.
Opportunity, like possibilities.
Yeah, possibilities.
Well, the possibility space.
And just help.
Yes.
Really. I grew up in the medical field when my mom had cancer, and seeing not only my mom struggle financially with having cancer, I mean, it's a fucking expensive experience, seeing all these other parents and kids be there as well, having little to no help.
Yeah.
If there was maybe a food service or a shelter they could go and get those 3 meals a day, I know that that would really lift a burden off of a lot of people who shouldn't be feeling burdensome, period. I like the work that you brought up in our senior research class about supposed high-risk populations, because I really resonate a lot with what you're saying. I never think that people are naturally risky. I think that the world makes them feel that way. Nothing is burdensome for people, and I think what makes people a little scared of getting into critical theory and the way that you work with it is that a lot of people don't want to reckon with the fact that these are natural things that can happen to you.
Yeah.
And the way that things are set up are not to benefit you. But being aware and being cognizant of the world around you just makes you, I think, much more of a kind person.
Yeah.
And the way that you teach your courses and the way that you introduce these topics is with the utmost kindness, because it is difficult not only for them to hear, but you're coming from a standpoint where you have so much empathy and awareness of the things that you're talking about that you can't talk about it in a way that's not kind.
Thank you for saying that. Well, it's really important to me that we recognize a sense of responsibility, or feel that like understanding that our built environment, that our world is the result of a series of choices. That indeed, like, I think a really good example is this high-risk population. So in talking about risk being political, the suggestion is that riskiness or being high risk isn't a stable characteristic or stable trait of an individual, but rather it like arises from a variety of political decisions, from the world that we build together, and that we can do otherwise. And what's really important to me is like finding that creative space of like seeing, you said you wish that you had seen something like Grace Grows or Grace Marketplace when you were younger. And I think that I deeply resonate with that, because I think that our creative ability to engage in world building, and I think that's part of why I love sci-fi and Afrofuturism, but like to engage in like world building and to think differently, it's really hard to foster. It's really tough, because we become convinced that there's like this stable furniture to the universe that can't be moved. Another good example of like a high-risk population, or I guess an application of the idea of a high-risk population that you and I have talked about before, and I follow Shelley Tremaine's argument on this, is the vulnerability that folks encountered as elderly persons in nursing homes, often with no other place to go during COVID. And there was sort of talk about how they were vulnerable to COVID almost naturally. But the fact of the matter is that some people see, and I think it's right to say something like this, the nursing home is a part of a sort of carceral state, because a lot of people who go there are unable to make another choice. Often they're impoverished, often they're disabled, and it's the only place they can get the relevant services paid for by Medicare or Medicaid. And those individuals were put at risk by that institution. They're not sort of naturally at risk. There are things that arise as you age, like it might take longer for your wounds to heal. But the question of being at risk is one that we can shift and change. We can do something about whether or not somebody is placed in front of this speeding train that is COVID, right? So in other words, I really appreciate what you're saying, and I think that part of the desire that I have is to show that we have political possibilities, that we're in a world that is like deeply contingent and can be changed. So I love Grace Marketplace, and I love that they allow folks who aren't sober to come. We also talked about like safe injection sites. In bioethics, I often teach about possibility spaces for treating folks like human beings, regardless of their status vis-a-vis drug use and whether or not they're engaging in that. And that's the most important thing of all. And so I just want to like mention one more time something that you said, which is the treating people as humans. So Jelena Petrovich is the current director of our community education project. I've been on the leadership team since 2016. I started teaching a little bit before that at the prison. And so Jelena and I, since the departure of two of our collaborators, have really been the sole leads on this. And it's our prison education program at Stetson University, totally faculty-led, faculty-founded. We get into Tomoka Correctional, the spaces of Tomoka Correctional Institution, and, you know, it shouldn't be radical, but it is. We just get in there and treat people like human beings and read stuff. That's all there is to it. And they're growing a beautiful garden, and our program is growing, and there are 100 varieties at any given time of plants in the garden that they built. Jelena and I just closed out our melon grant that supported that garden. And we're going to hear this month about a grant that we applied for from the National Endowment of the Humanities to do a podcast in the space of the garden, because the guys want to do that. That's their project that they want to do. They want to call it like Echoes or Echoes in the Garden or something like that, and they want to invite people into their world, and I'm hopeful that we get that grant. But thanks to Laughing Gull Foundation, which does LGBTQI centers and work in the South and prison education, and thanks to Stan Van Gundy, and his wife Kim, who we unfortunately lost last year, we are able to continue to operate regardless. So we have amazing funders, we have an amazing program, and literally all we have to do is get in there. This is going to make it sound easy. It's really not. But the most important thing is easy, and that's treating those individuals like human beings. The other stuff is really, really hard. Making sure that we don't get kicked out of the prison, making sure that they have 4 credit courses that are paid for. So making sure that those courses are offered regularly and on topics that they like, that stuff is friggin' impossible. But even though we're regularly failing, that we do the important part. So, and we are thrilled that Michael Serwarnu is going to teach a journalism class this summer, regardless of whether or not we get the NEH grant, to get them started on that podcast project, because it's their authorship. They're saying, this is our story. We're going to do this. And anyway, I really wanted to mention that, because in thinking about what's special about Grace Grows and Grace Marketplace, I think that we're able to do some of that as well at Tomoka Correctional.
It's been really delightful to work with Dr. Petrovic with the Tomoka students personally. For Touchstone, we opened up them being able to submit to the magazine, and not a lot of them submitted this year, but I'm really hopeful now that they know about what Touchstone is, that they can submit more work and get represented next year.
I think it's great, because they're Stetson undergrads. They're just at a non-traditional campus, but they're enrolled at Stetson. They're non-degree seeking enrolled Stetson students, undergrads at Stetson. So is anything going to be included in Touchstone this year?
Not this year.
Okay, but maybe next year.
Hopefully next year. There was a piece that I really did love this year that was Lost Boys of Stetson.
Yes.
I cannot, for the life of me, recall the author. I'll have it put in the description if I can.
Yeah.
His piece about being a Stetson student but not being what Stetson wants to promote, or just the average life of a Stetson student being a separate campus incarcerated student. Representation like that was really important to me, and giving them more access.
Frankie.
Giving them more access to getting into the book if they can is really important to me, and something that I am encouraging the future Touchstone representatives to uphold, and we've talked about it. They've agreed. It's in my handbook that they have to do it again.
They're going to do it.
Next
well
year.
Done, Ali. That's why I absolutely adore you.
And I will be their overseer.
Yeah.
So they will be working on that, and it's just about getting this process even more streamlined for Dr. P. It was our first year doing it this year, but that's definitely something I want to continue.
That's wonderful. And I want to briefly plug that Borough Press published a second text that anthologizes Tomoka Correctional students, Stetson students' work, and it's called What Grows There, and it is mainly focused on the garden, but it's all kinds of different writings, and that was edited by Denise Yesbick. You can find it on the Borough Press website. It was published in July of 2023. And if you look a little bit deeper into our archives, we also have that first edition, which is called More Than Our Blues, also edited by Denise Yesbick and sort of published by us, like in-house, before Borough Press was established at Stetson. So Community Education Project published that one. It's available on Amazon. And normally I wouldn't plug Amazon, but the reality is you either have to visit Community Education Project on the second floor of Elizabeth, which I welcome you to do, and buy one from me or Yelena Petrovich personally, or go on Amazon. But we do have access to some of their writings, and they're just really incredible creative minds and totally amazing writing. So, yeah. But thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about so many things with you. I love this because it's reminding me of all of our different elements of overlap and getting me really excited to work with you on your senior project in the fall.
Thank you. I'm super excited. I'm really grateful that you came to visit Lane and I in the office today, and you too, Frankie.
And I love to meet Lane. Lane is fabulous. This is great.
Lane truly is fabulous. I'm so happy that he's having this show, and I've had the opportunity to interview so many fun professors, including my favorite professor, looking directly at my camera, so this is known. This is my favorite professor, Dr. Melinda Hall of the Philosophy Department.
That makes me so happy.
Frankie, do you want to say hello for the outro? Yes, you do. Thank you again for coming to visit us.
Thank you for having me and Franklin Delano.
Hi, Franklin Delano.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Lane.
Thank you, and we'll see you on the next episode of Hats Off.
So super fun.